Welcome back to the weekend with Anthony Opperman. Boy, it feels like fishing weather right now, certainly warming up a lot here in Richmond. And I guess it's appropriate that we talk some fishing again. Welcome back in for the Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, Chris Dunnavant. And Chris, certainly an exciting week for you guys as another state record. Of course, we had the state record for the striper back appropriately timed enough, right when we had the big fishing expo up in Doswell. And now another state record, this one caught by Rod Kegley, a new spotted bass. Just you had a chance to talk to Rod. Tell a little bit of the backstory behind this.
Sure. It's perfect. The weather's warming up, and here we get the news. Potential state record has been caught. It has now been verified. It goes through what happens when a state record is caught. Someone has to contact a DGIF employee. They have to come and verify the weight. A biologist has to come out and verify the species and make sure everything's that fish hasn't been tampered with. And then it goes through a state record committee, and that has just been confirmed. It is a state record. But I got to talk to Rod, and a real neat guy. He's been fishing all his life, bass fishing, comes from a bass fishing family. In fact, his dad was a founding member of Pulaski County Bassmasters. And he lives 5 minutes from Claytor Lake in Dublin, and so he fishes Claytor Lake a lot. And there are very few lakes in Virginia that have spotted bass, but Claytor is one of those, and it had the former state record, 3 pounds 10 ounces. This fish weighed 4 pounds 7 ounces, so quite a large jump in the record. And but Rod, interestingly enough, the other big story with this is that he caught it on an Alabama-style rig. So here this year, this new technique that's out, and the weather's warming up, and it's just getting started, and he catches this fish on the Alabama rig. It's actually the Yum version, the Yumbrella. So it was a pretty exciting deal for him, and actually when he caught it, he keeps a few fish this time of year, not expecting a spotted bass that big, but he keeps a few to eat this time of year, and he just threw it in the live well thinking it was a largemouth. And he went to see a weigh-in, tournament weigh-in. He was curious about that, and after the weigh-in was concluded, he said, "Hey, would you mind weighing my fish in?" When he pulled his fish out, another angler said, "Whoa, what a spotted bass, that's huge." As soon as he realized it was a spotted bass, he knew he had the record, and so they kept it there at the marina, waited for John Copeland, our biologist, to come and check it out, and the rest is history. It's a new state record.
I want to get back to the Alabama rig in just 1 second, but the other interesting fact of this is that that fish back in Claytor Lake, right?
That's right. So what a turnaround. That fish, it was a real neat chain of events. Number one, he really was ready to go home that day, and he just kind of at the last minute said, let me go check out that weigh-in. If he had made a left turn instead of a right turn and gone back to the boat ramp, that fish would have ended up in, as he said, Lake Crisco. But he ended up going to the weigh-in, and because it was a record, they released all the fish except for that one. So all those fish, they got free that day. But because they were waiting, holding that fish, when he got the call that night that it was confirmed a state record, he said, "Hey, just go ahead and release it. Let it go." So that fish, that state record fish, is still in the lake. Maybe it's eaten a few more shad by now, and maybe it's a little bit bigger, so it's there.
Well, what are the chances of it getting much bigger? I mean, is this kind of where it's going to max out, or can it get a little bit bigger than the 4 pounds 7 ounces?
Well, I think the potential is there. I mean, it's hard to say without actually aging the fish,
sure,
and knowing where it's at, but certainly this is the time of year when the fish is going to weigh the most. It's pre-spawn, so it's got loaded with eggs, and it's feeding up. And it's cold water, so the metabolism is still a little bit slower. Once it gets really hot, their metabolism is really racing, and they're just eating just to maintain. So this is the peak time of year for weight. But if that fish lives on and has a few more years, no doubt that fish is a chance to get bigger. But the thing is, if there's one in there that big, there's more. So that's good news.
Chris Dunnavant from the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, talking about the new state record for a spotted bass now belongs to Rod Kegley. Kind of interesting on this St. Patrick's Day that the proverbial fishing pot of gold in Dublin, Virginia,
That's right.
And maybe there is this pot of gold in Claytor Lake there in Dublin with all these huge spotted bass. But, Chris, the other thing that I wanted to touch upon was something that you did bring up, the fact that this was caught with a version of the Alabama rig. And, we have had a discussion already on this segment about the Alabama rig and its impact in the fishing industry. It's a state record now being caught on this particular type of lure. And evidently, this has been a pretty hot lure that's being cast right now.
Absolutely. And to my knowledge, this is the first state record caught on an Alabama-style rig. And I need to verify that, but I don't recall a record being broken on that rig yet. So this is big news. Really hoping that some folks pick up on that this is a pretty big accomplishment. But yeah, Rod said that it is one of the hottest baits at Claytor Lake right now, and they are really throwing that bait a lot. In fact, what's interesting is he got that bait, his fishing partner gave it to him for his birthday in December. And when his fishing partner got a hold of two of them, and he kind of had a second thought about giving it to him, he said, well, maybe I need to keep one as a backup. But his girlfriend, his friend's girlfriend, was kind of poking him along, saying, you got to give it to him, give him his present. He was over at their house one day, and so he finally gave it to him. And he never had any idea that when Paul Elias won that tournament at Lake Guntersville, and he saw that, and when he got that Alabama rig from his friend, that then here a few months later he'd be a state record holder. But he's been through a few different versions, lost a few, so it wasn't that exact one. But he said that a lot of people are throwing it, and he wasn't really convinced. But he was fishing in an area at Claytor back in January, and he saw another angler catching several fish on it. And so he realized that he needed to take this rig seriously. And in fact, it has been such a hot bait. In his words, he says it's a game changer. It's you've got to throw this bait if you're going to want to catch some of the bigger fish. But the tournament that he went and checked out, it was won with 10 fish, 29 pounds. And that's a great average, almost a 3-pound average caught on the Alabama rig. So it is definitely making its mark. And this is just the tip of the iceberg because the weather's just warming up, the fishing season is just heating up. And it's really going to be fun to see what this year unfolds for the Alabama-style rigs.
Chris Dunnavant from the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, our weekly wildlife conversation here on the weekend with Anthony Opperman. And, Chris, you bring that up, and that was something that I did want to mention is that, in our previous conversations about this, and obviously the BASS trail going right away to banning the Alabama rig, that's kind of what we discussed, the fact that we haven't had a full calendar year to see the kind of impact that it will have or could have. Now we're going to finally get our chance to see that.
That's right. And time will tell. I imagine that right now that you're going to see a lot of early tournaments in the year because of the time of year, caught, one and high finishes on the Alabama rig. But it will be interesting to see the endurance of this. Anytime there's a new hot technique like this, everybody's using it. And part of why so many people may be catching fish on it is because everybody's throwing it. But over time, we'll see if it can maintain that pace. That will be another part of the interesting scenario to see what kind of catches we see out of it. But, what's the endurance of it? How's it going to, is it going to maintain this intensity for a long period of time? Is it going to be a kind of a flash in the pan? So time will tell. It'll be really interesting to see how that all unfolds.
Weekly wildlife conversation here on the weekend with Chris Dunnavant from the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. And Chris, this time of year, there are a couple things you can mark on your calendars. Number one, I'm going to dip into my linen shirt collection. And number two, there's going to be people lined up along the James River on my ride home to Rockets Landing. That sure is the case these days. Matter of fact, even this morning when I was on my way into work, I was able to see a couple of people out fishing. I guess this is that time of year, huh?
It is. And, with this warm weather, people are going to go out there fishing. And they're fishing down there in the James. They're fishing for catfish. And it's not going to be long now that the stripers and the shad and all of those fish are going to be really funneling in. And it's just going to only increase. It's going to not be long from now that you're going to see just dozens and dozens and dozens of boats crowded around that area fishing for those shad. So it's a lot to look forward to, and just knowing that right now those shad, they're working their way into the bay, working their way up the river, and they're on their way. They're coming to Richmond.
Because it's been such a mild winter, how is that going to impact some of these bodies of water? You think they're going to be able to warm up a little bit quicker, and is that going to have an impact?
I think it will, and I think already I'm hearing from anglers just all over different bodies of water. The lakes just never got really cold like they normally did. They didn't get into the 30s. Most people were reporting temperatures in the 40s through the wintertime. So, yeah, and especially with this warm spell that we're having, the lakes are going to really jump up there. The fish are still going to follow the seasonal patterns. I still firmly believe, and other folks agree, that they're following length of day and moon phases and things like that. Sure, water temperature is a big factor there too. But, a lot of it's for these shad that we're talking about, a lot of it's going to be the rain flow and the amount of rain that we get in the river levels. If the river's really high and flooded, it's going to hold those shad back a little bit, but it's also going to make the fishing tough. So that, there's so many different factors, but there's no doubt that a mild winter just gets things kicked off earlier.
He's Chris Dunnavant from the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries, our weekly wildlife conversation here on the weekend with Anthony Opperman. And Chris, it's going to be a nice Saturday, so I guess I better let you get out there and cast that line a little bit. As always, thank you so much for joining us, and certainly there's going to be a lot to talk about in the upcoming weeks. I'm looking forward to spending our first spring and summer together doing this segment.
I am too, Anthony. It's looking forward to it. It ought to be an exciting time.
And Chris Dunnavant from the Virginia Department of Game and Inland Fisheries. When we come back here on the weekend with Anthony Opperman, we got my game plan for the weekend. Rest assured, plenty of NCAA hoops and some St. Patty's Day stops along the way. Stay tuned.
The show is almost over, but the weekend is just getting started. More of The Weekend with Anthony Opperman is next on Sports Radio 910.